Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Demai. We're up to Perek Dal, Mishnah Daled. We discussed in the previous Mishnayot that when it comes to separating the Maasrot from Demai, the produce that we got from an Amaretz, there are certain separations that you only have to verbally designate, like Maaser Ani, Maaser Rishon, the portions that go to the Levi or the poor person. However, there are other portions you have to verbally designate and physically separate, like Terumat Maaser, the portion that goes to the Kohen, the 10% of the Levi's portion that is given over to the Kohen. So the Mishnah discusses now if you can give over tithe produce that was verbally designated to the people who are entitled to them on Shabbat. Mi shekira shem b'tumat maaser shel Demai ulmaaser ani shel vadai lo yitelem b'Shabbat. Someone who designated by name tirumat maaser of Demai or maaser ani of definite tevel before Shabbat in order to remove the prohibition of the tevel, but he didn't physically separate the tithes from the rest of the produce. Lo yitelem b'Shabbat. He cannot take them and give them to the Kohen or the poor person on Shabbat. Now, Rabotai, the reason it says Tirumat Maaser of Demai and Maaser Ani of Vadai is because those are the situations where I have to verbally designate and physically separate. Tirumat Maaser of Demai is like this. I buy produce from an Amaretz. I have to separate 10% for the Levi only verbally. I don't have to physically give it to the Levi because once I verbally separate it, I designate this portion is Maaser Rishon for the Levi. I took away the prohibition. All we have left is the Levi claiming I want it physically. That's already a monetary dispute. I tell the Levi, prove to me that it wasn't already given to another person, another Levi. Since he can't prove that, I get to keep it. However, the 10% of that portion has to be given over to the Kohen no matter what, even physically. Why? Because unlike the Maaser Rishon that anybody can eat, it has no sanctity, the Tirumat Maaser, the portion that goes from that to the Kohen, can only be eaten by a Kohen. So that I must give to the Kohen even from Demai. That's why it says I verbally designated it, but I didn't physically separate it yet, which I have to do. Or Maaser Ani of Vadai, because we said if you buy Demai produce from an Amaretz, you only have to verbally designate the 10% for the poor. You don't have to physically give it to them, because again, anybody can have that portion, any poor person, whether Kohen or not Kohen. Once I verbally designate it, I take away the Isur. All I have left is a monetary problem, and I have to tell the poor person, prove to me that another poor person didn't get it yet. Since he has no proof, I get to keep it. However, by Maaser Ani of Vadai, a produce that certainly didn't have anything removed, I not only do I have to verbally designate it, I have to physically separate it. So in these cases, when I verbally designated these two items on Erev Shabbat, but I didn't physically give it to the Kohen or the Levi yet, the Mishnah says, Lo yitelem b'Shabbat, you are not allowed to take them and give them to the Kohen or to the poor person on Shabbat. Why? The Mefarshim say that the Chachamim made a decree. The sages said that if we will allow you to give these designated portions to their recipients, people are going to think that you actually tithed it on Shabbat, which is asur. You cannot actually tithe the produce on Shabbat or even verbally designate it because you're making the food able to be eaten. In this case, technically, since you designated it Erev Shabbat, there's no problem with the food anymore. However, if we would allow you to give it to the Kohen or the Levi, people will think you actually did that on Shabbat. Likewise, the Chachamim prohibited inviting a Kohen or a poor person who generally don't eat in your house to come to your house and eat the tithes on Shabbat. Why? Because since this Kohen and poor person don't generally eat in your house, people will think you specifically invited them to give them their gifts. If they generally come to your house, that's a different story. But if they don't ever come to your house, Chachamim say you cannot invite them because people will think when they come in, oh, they're coming in because they're going to eat the tithes that were just separated now, and they're going to think you could do it on Shabbat. And again, that's asur. But the Mishnah says now, in a case where you could invite them on Shabbat and feed them the tithes. So if the Kohen or poor person were accustomed to eating by this person, in this case they can come on Shabbat and eat the tithes. Why? The owner can feed them the tithes, not only that he physically separated Erev Shabbat, but even the ones that he verbally separated Erev Shabbat without physically separating it. Why? Because again, since in this case, they often come to your house, there's no concern that people will think you're giving them tithes that were just separated. But the Mishnah says it's only allowed provided the owner tells the Kohen and the the Kohen and the poor person that I'm giving you food that is entitled to you anyways. Otherwise, they're going to think you're doing them a favor by giving them your own personal food, and then they're going to feel indebted to you for your kindness. You're going to gain personally from the maaser, which is asur. The Gemara says that you have to give the tithes as a gift and not in return for any benefit. Therefore, you have to inform them. You should know, by the way, this is not my food. This is food that belongs to you regardless. Continuing with Mishnah Hey. האומר למי שאינו נאמן על המעשרות, קח לי ממישהו נאמן ומישהו מעשר אינו נאמן. Somebody who tells a עם הארץ, somebody who's not trusted by מעשרות, you tell him, קח לי ממישהו נאמן, go get produce from me, from somebody who only buys tithed produce, וממישהו מעשר, or by somebody who buys any produce but is careful to tithe it, אינו נאמן. When the agent, when this amaretz comes back and says, oh, here's the produce, I bought it tithed, I bought it from somebody that tithes it, or somebody that buys always tithed, and he's not believed. Why? Because the Metarshim explain that this agent can be lying, he can get the produce from anybody, even amaretz, and he'll come and lie and say, I got it from somebody that's trustworthy. And even if I'm going to go investigate and say, yeah, what's his name? I'm going to go verify, and I find out that he was lying, what's the agent going to tell me? Oh, I don't know, I thought he was trustworthy. Therefore, we cannot believe him. However, Mi'ish Ploni, if I tell my agent, this amaretz, go get produce from Reuven, who's trustworthy, in this case, the agent is believed. Why? Because if he lies, he's going to be caught very easily. I'm going to investigate, I'm going to ask my friend Reuven, he's going to say he never came to me, and the agent doesn't want to lie, doesn't want to get caught lying. Therefore, in that case, he is believed. Halach likach mimenu, if he went, the agent went to Reuven now to buy it, the Amarlo, he came back to the owner and he told him, Lo mitzativ. He came back to the sender. He said, Lo mitzativ, I couldn't find Reuven. V'lakachti lecha me'acher shu ne'eman. But I got you produce from somebody else who is trustworthy. Eno ne'eman. The Mishnah says that the agent is not believed and the produce requires tithing because again, since he admits that he bought the produce from somebody else, and not from Reuven, the trustworthy friend, we cannot accept his word because we're back to the original issue of him possibly lying. And even if we catch him, he's going to say, oh, I thought the person was trustworthy. So that's why the Mishnah concludes. Halach likach mimenu. If this agent went to Reuven to try to buy the produce, v'amarlo, and he came back to the sender and he told him, Lo mitzativ, I couldn't find Reuven, v'lakachti lecha me'acher shu ne'eman, but I got it from somebody else who is trustworthy, and ne'eman, he is not believed. Obviously, Rabotai, the Mishnah is talking about a case where you didn't investigate. If, however, you sent your agent to buy it, and he came back and told you it's tied, you cannot believe him. But if you investigate and find out that he actually did get it from a trustworthy person, then obviously you don't have to separate anything. We're talking about a case where you didn't investigate. Can you rely on the amaretz agent's words? That's where the Mishnah concludes. Only when you specify the person, that way he can get caught if he lies. However, if you told him just go get from anybody who's trustworthy, we do not believe him because even if we catch him lying, he'll make an excuse and say, "Oh, I thought he was trustworthy." That is the end of today's Mishnah. Ani Rabotai, Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen v'Amen.